Hey everyone, it's been over a decade since I last Why am I in Canada Goose with an ugly plaid shirt and a sailor's cap? Why am I in this grey void and... Oh no, is this because I'm going to plagiarize one of Emperor Tiger Star's video series he does from time to time? Yeah, I am. Anyway, I'm Comrade Canada Goose, and today we are looking at the end of the Great War. Not the Great War that was supposed to be the end to all wars, no. I'm talking about the Great War in this nation-states region called, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Kylaris. A while back, I opened a survey on the regional Discord to discuss how the Great War peace treaties could have gone. The borders that were reached at the end of the Great War, the timeline that the Kylarites operate in, were only reached that way because that was how the negotiators negotiated things. But these borders weren't the only options to end the war, and as we will soon see, there were several options on the table, of which I will show one of them, based on what you, the public, have chosen. And where better to start off than in Euclea? This is how it looked like before the war. Yeah, I know, it looked pretty terrible back then. Don't worry, things can only get better from here. We start out with the largest of the Entente powers, Gallica, and in particular whether y'all wanted the pre-1926 borders of Kesselberg and Hennehalve to be restored. Nearly 50% of you said that actually Kesselberg should be part of Hennehalve, with another third of you saying you wanted the borders expanded way southward compared to where it was before 1926. And a few of you may wonder why there's no Brugeldal, and that's because, let's be real, there's no way in hell it would have survived the war. I don't know why it survived this one. We then tackled Gallica itself. In the original timeline, only Champagne and Dozance were given independence, with the Kasavians, the Gordesians, and the Amanihides, sorry for butchering the pronunciation, remaining Gallica. 63% of you decide that all of them should be independent states, with only 20% of you deciding that only Champagne and Dozance deserved independence. This leaves only the periphery for us to deal with. In the northwest, Valduvia received pretty much everything in the north that had been already allocated to Kesselberg and Hennehalve, while Saravia gobbled up the rest of the west. But 70% of you said that Gallica's Miersen provinces should be given independence, so Saravia only received a far smaller portion than it otherwise got. I'm sure that'll bode well for the future of the continent. In the south, Etruria sought to expand its northern border to encompass more of the Aventines, but only received the Settentrionale panhandle, while Amathia received a narrow strip of Gallican land in the southwest. But nearly half of you decide that Etruria deserved everything in the Aventines that it wanted, while refusing to give anything to Amathia, with only a third of you deciding to go for the historical option. Speaking of Amathia, they also had their own Champagnan population. In the original timeline, they joined their Gallican neighbors to create a unified Champagne, and nearly half of you decided that was going to happen here too. But 40% of you decide that, to paraphrase some fictional guy, you love Champagne so much you want to see two of them. But unfortunately, we couldn't always get what we want, so I hope you're happy with one. Amathia stole quite a lot of land from Tungaria in the St. Andrews War, and it is clear that Tungaria would like their land back. The other alternatives were Tungaria taking back Prieda, and Tungaria also taking back the former southern march of the Lenovo Empire. 46.7% of you decide that Tungaria should have all that back, whereas 43.3% of you were content with how things actually went. Lastly, Etruria fought long and hard against Amathia, and they wanted some compensation. This actually ended up in an exact tie between give Etruria everything it wanted from Amathia and giving Etruria nothing, so for the first in several times I had to filter out the votes of the non-Kylarites. This tilted things in favor of giving Etruria everything it wanted in Amathia. In contrast, nearly half of you decide Etruria would get nothing from Pyrrhia, even though Pyrrhia fought alongside functionalists. Not even Tarpeia, with only less than a quarter of you supporting giving Tarpeia to Etruria. Now, before I tackle this next question, I will let you know that since I published the survey, I've received feedback from my Zaposia and Trevania viewers who've noticed that I didn't do accurate research before I wrote the question, and rightfully pointed out that at the time of the Great War, Zaposia and Trevania were two distinct countries under a single government, not a singular country as I've assumed. As someone who specializes in making historical videos like these, it is my responsibility to do things right the first time, and I admit that I didn't do things right the first time. I apologize to everyone for not doing the proper research. I take full responsibility for my sloppiness, and I promise that I will improve my research in future videos and delay the release of anything if it is not up to the standards that you expect from me, as I expect from myself. Anyway, just over 40% of you decide that Saravia should get a chunk of Zaposia, that Rudon will be separated from Trevania, and that both Zaposia and Trevania will be two fully sovereign, independent states. Interestingly, nearly a quarter of you thought that Zaposia and Trevania should remain united, while a fifth of you thought that Zaposia and Trevania should become fully sovereign states, as happened in the original timeline. Lastly, among the minor Entente powers in Euclea, nearly 60% of you decide that Parisha should be chopped up into its constituent countries, with the next largest option, keeping Parisha united but losing all its colonies, was chosen by just under a quarter vote. I'm not sure why y'all wanted to punish Parisha so badly, but here ya go. While we were busy tackling the minor Entente powers, other issues rose in Euclea. In Miersa, there was a general strike against Saravian rule in 1936 that was so successful that its Miersa leader, Wolfgar Gottfriedson, had to divide Miersa in two, with East Miersa becoming a council estate and West Miersa being a pro-Saravian state, at least in theory. Y'all decided that was the wrong way to go, and 43.3% of you decide that Saravia should crush the uprising by any means necessary, while another 40% of you thought that Saravia should just leave Miersa and let the dominoes fall as they may. Interestingly, had y'all chosen to compromise, we might see Saravia Miersa be split into north and south or something along those lines. Wild to think about, eh? In Esmir, Borland broke free from Esmir's rule after the Boorish people decided that they didn't want to be Esmirish anymore, and y'all made the boring choice to follow through with that, with just under 60% of you voting in favor of Boorish independence. On the plus side, Esmir is a lot less boring now. Across the border in Verania, there were concerns about how popular Golic and Rutland was among the Ruts, and 43.3% of you decided to kick out the Ruts from their homes and send them to Golica. I'm sure that's not going to cause any problems down the line, though, sirree. Moving on, y'all were exactly split on whether or not to give the Line Islands back to Asmara, or whether Blossland should keep them. After filtering out the non-Kylerite voters, it was decided that Asmara can get them back. Finally, exactly half of you decide that Montecara should become independent, with just over 40% wanting Montecara to be an international zone administered by the Community of Nations to protect the free movement of goods across the Orion. On the plus side, I bet that Mr. Marsili's film project will lead to the start of something great for that little country, though I'm sure it'll never beat out the Verlois Film Festival once that gets back into action. Once everything's said and done, this is what Euclea looks like. It already looks like we've achieved peace in our time and we're only one continent down. We jump across the Orion for our first foray into Koyus. Not the one with a T, Koyus. This was how Abastria and Bahia looked like before the war. Lots of red and green on there. If it were any more red-green, I'd have to break out the handyman's secret weapon. Duct tape. First, we look at Injasa. And some of you may have already noticed that there were 4 options in this pie chart, even though you could only see 3 options on the survey that you took. That was because I put the star next to the wrong option, and somebody clicked that before I was able to change it. While I was a little concerned that that might have skewed the vote, I need not worry. At least 53% of you decided that of Injasa would be united with Atudea to be part of the Trans-Saharan Federation, and if we count the one with the star next to it, then that goes up to 56%. Splendid. In hindsight for Atudea, I should have made the question a little clearer and give it a separate option for make it a separate Esmir's trust territory, especially if Injusur wound up being Eturian or something. But it was an academic question in the end because 2/3 of you decided that Atudea should be part of the Trans-Sabaran Federation. We have another tie question with exactly half of you saying that Golican Senkuno should be Varanian and exactly half of you saying that it should be Esmirish. After we filtered out the non-Kalarite votes, Esmir takes over Senkuno. In Outgund, it was far more divided, with 40% of you deciding that Esmir should have all of it, 26% saying that Varania should have all of it, and 23% saying that Varania should administer most of it, but Esmir can have some of it, as was the case in our timeline. But because this is a democracy and not a republic, Esmir gets all of Outgund. And I hope I'm pronouncing this right, by the way. A similar situation happened in Basiland, with 23% wanting Varania to administer it, 27% wanting Esmir to administer it, and 13% wanting Etruria to administer it. However, 36% of you decide that because so many countries wanted it, Basiland should be an international zone administered by the CN. Across the bay, 1/3 of you wanted Esmir to outright annex Xaviera, sorry for mispronouncing it, although 1/5 of you wanted Esmir to administer it as a trust territory, 36% of you decide that the AFR, with a shared language, should administer it as a trust territory, so I'm going to go with the will of the people here and award Xaviera to the AFR. Finally, we reached the periphery of Bahia, Cambo. Like Senkumo, it was an exact tie, with half of you wanting to give it to Esmir as a trust territory, like what happened in our timeline, while the other half wanted to incorporate it into the Bureau of Southeast Koyus. After we filtered out non-Kylarite votes, Cambo has been transferred to the Bureau of Southeast Koyus. After all said and done, this is how he decided Bastia and Bahia moving forward. And if you're wondering why Cambo is independent as Mabifia instead of being part of the Bureau, we'll get to that once we show you what Southern Koyos was like before the war. Yes, it looks like Shanghai was even more gigantically oversized than it currently is. But before we can deal with that, we have a few places to go through first. In the immediate post-war period, the Bureau of Southeast Koyus was transferred to Esmir's administration. However, Esmir was horribly overstretched and could not effectively administer it, which was made worse by what you guys have voted for, so I've asked you how it should be dealt with. Just over 60% of you said that we should take the historical path of splitting the Bureau up into independent countries, which, because of what you've chosen in the previous question, means we have Mabivia in the north, Desavan in the middle, and Lavana in the south. And as for the border between Desavan and Lavana, I just used the border that was decided in this timeline for the sake of time. Nearby, the Golican colony of Nouvelle-Anglais was coveted by many. Esmir because it was close by to the Carolinian Islands, Etruria wanted it for some reason, and Varania wanted it too, plus obviously Golica wanted to keep it. While just over a quarter of you wanted to give it to Etruria, 1/3 of you decided it should be annexed to the Carolinian Islands, with another 16% suggesting that Esmir administer it as a trust territory. In between the two, you've got the island of Tengari, and there are... Oh, looks like y'all decide that the AFR should control the island just as they did in this timeline. Very well then. Now this is an interesting question. Before the war, Golica controlled a whole bunch of Sublustrian islands, and after the war, those islands had to be given to someone. And this pie chart right there, that's almost perfect. But alas, we didn't have a 4-way tie, we had a 2-way tie between uniting all of them with the Varanian Sublustrian colonies and giving the Tautea Islands to Saravia and giving the rest to Varania. After we filtered out the non-Kylarite votes, you've decided to give the Tautea Islands to Saravia, and that Varania can have the rest. I'm sure Varania will be grateful that they got something for once. Hopefully they'll get something else. In Cathena, we had an almost even split between making Cathena fully independent and placing it under Senrine administration, with the historical option giving it to Varania just getting a fifth of the vote. However, slightly more of you decide that Kathina should be administered by Senria. Over in Siamat, nearly 60% of you decide that Esmir should administer it, not Verania. As we sail westwards to the Pilots, just over a quarter of you wanted Esmir to administer the islands, just under a third of you wanted Saravia to administer them so that they could project power into the Vehemans, but 43% of you decide that Senria deserved to have the Sunahamas, and honestly, they deserved it. It's not like they'll be getting much from their eastern neighbor. For Shingeia, I hesitate putting the Nakagawa plan on there because I was like, this doesn't seem realistic at all. It's just going to lead to endless war. But I got a lot of angry DMs from people demanding that I include the Nakagawa plan. So instead of just having two options, the Tree of Casey plan and the Isayama plan, I also include the Nakagawa plan. 60% of y'all decide that the Nakagawa plan was the way to go. Not sure why you guys think it's a good idea, but I can understand why you might believe that given, well, yeah. To the north of Shingeia, the Golican colony of Songte had to be handed over to one of the victorious powers. Although both Etruria and Saravia could have taken it, just under two-thirds of y'all decided Senria should administer Songte. I think Ansan would be a good name, don't you think? Further north, the Golican colony of Venikara faced a near three-way tie, with the vote to give the island to either Esmir, Saravia, or Etruria being separated by one vote each. However, y'all have decided that Etruria should minister the island, so they shall minister Venikara. Finally, we return back to where we started to deal with Hacienda, which has always been on the margins of the Bureau, and of Koyus more generally. Just over 13% of you want to make it part of the Bureau's Southeast Koyus, just over a quarter want Etruria to have it, but 60% of you decide that Hacienda should be an independent state. This is where we end up, with a whole slew of independent countries. I'm not sure how many of them will last, especially where the Shingean Republic was, but I'm sure it's probably a lot less volatile than it is in Euclea. Like, it is definitely peace in our time over there, right? Finally, we head to the Asterias. It shouldn't take too long. There's only a small handful of places to talk about. We should be done pretty quickly. To start with the island of Tabel, it used to be part of Cassier until the Great Collapse when the islanders voted to return to Golican rule. Although the North Barrier Islands remained part of Cassier, after the war, Rosealand really wanted both the North Barrier Islands and Tabel, with the Bow of Coriol wanting to give the islands to Rosealand. Another core view, roughly, wanted to only give the North Barrier Islands to Cassier and give Tabel independence. However, 36% of y'all decided that actually Esmir needs the minerals to rebuild the country, and that should minister the island until Esmir was fully rebuilt, after which time will probably either be given back to Cassier or be given sovereign independence. In Ardesia, just over a quarter of you wanted to take the historical option of just giving Vanilla the lands that Ardesia stole during the Chihiran War, but 63% of y'all decided that Ardesia should also give Cipriano to Eldmark and the remaining northern states to the AFR. The AFR now looks a lot better, don't you think? Over in the Arushan, the Golican colonies were administered after the war under a multinational Arushan Federation organized under the aegis of the Community of Nations, and 40% of you decided that all the Golican colonies, including those it took from Alcuria, would be part of said federation. A third of you wanted two trust territories, one for each of the main island groups, and have the new Orion Islands be an international zone, sort of like that idea for Montecarlo earlier, and a fifth of you want the same outcome as happened in the original. South of the Arushan, y'all narrowly decided, 53% to 47%, to split Southern up into its constituent states. I didn't say in the divided up option, but I took the opportunity to give Alcuria their land back, just as they would have had Southern stayed united. 57% of you wanted an independent Puramape, and 60% of you wanted an independent Rosalia. I would like to meet the voters who wanted a Satusune Puramape and an independent Rosalia because, well, you seem like fascinating people, And I want to know why you wanted Poor Mape to be Satisne, but Rosalia to be independent. For the most lopsided result in this survey, 83% of you decide that Western Arbolada should be ceded to Rosalia. I'm not sure what Arbolada did to y'all that made y'all want to punish them this badly, but the will of the people is the will of the people, I guess. Finally, for a similarly lopsided result, 73% of you decide that Nuvania should give land to both Alcuria and Sao Leopoldo, plus the city of Philipsby to Satavia, with the rest of y'all opting to just give land to Alcuria and Philipsby to Satavia. Once everything's said and done, this is where we end up in the Asterius. This is genuinely, aside from maybe Abastria and Bahia, the most stable place in this new timeline, though I do suspect there will probably be a couple wars in Asteria Superior thanks to the AFR becoming oversized. So, what have we learned now that I moved to the other side of this here screen? Don't know. Probably that's a bad idea to make a YouTube video to showcase the results of a survey when literally anything else could have worked for this April Fool's event, especially when you're trying to emulate a really great YouTuber. Anyway, if you're interested in seeing all the maps in full quality, click the link in the doobly-doo, and as always, I'll see y'all next time.